about English language teaching or ELT. Now, before we talk about English language teaching, it is important to understand language teaching, how language is taught. And to understand how language is taught, it is important to understand how a child acquires a language. So let's first understand language acquisition. The first language is the mother tongue or the native language of the child. For example, I was born in India, so my mother tongue is Hindi. I was born in an environment where my parents, my elders were speaking Hindi. So Hindi becomes my first language or my native language. It is also known as my mother tongue or my primary language. So when I was growing up, I was acquiring my first language, which is known as first language acquisition. So this is how children learn their native language. Okay, so when they look at people and they try to imitate the words they are speaking, this is known as first language acquisition. If you remember any child who is in the first phase of growing up, you might have seen the child babbling. Babbling means when the child is trying to produce sounds. Ma, pa. This is babbling. Babbling is considered to be the earliest form of language acquisition because infants will produce sounds based on what language input they receive. So if their parents are speaking Spanish, they are going to produce initial sounds which are Spanish. Whereas if I am growing up in an environment where my parents speak Hindi, I'm going to pronounce the first sounds which are Hindi. Now, after babbling comes a stage where the child starts to use one word. Okay, then he would say mum or he would say dad. Okay, so this is the next level of learning languages. And later on, he gradually learns how to say monosyllabic words and then he's going to form sentences. So this is how the first language acquisition takes place. We all have been through the same stage. But in this particular audio, I'm going to discuss how the second language acquisition is. What is second language acquisition? Second language acquisition refers to learning of another language or learning a language beside the native language. Language first. Okay. First we learned our mother tongue and then we learned the second language. So what you do as a kid is that when you're learning second language, you try to copy the rules of the first language and use it in the second language. So our knowledge and understanding of first language impact our understanding of second language. And what we do in the process of understanding and acquiring second language, we transfer grammar, vocabulary, syntax, spellings, pronunciation to the second language. So the first language grammar, vocabulary, spelling, pronunciation is transferred and used when we are learning second language. And this process of language transfer is also known as cross-meaning, linguistic interference. Please remember it is also known as linguistic interference and cross-meaning. Now it is due to people have different accents, people make mistakes in the second language. You can see that when a person acquires a second language, he to make a few mistakes and he's going to have a particular accent. This accent is because he's trying to copy the rules of language 1 to language 2. I'll give you two simple examples after which you'll understand what language transfer means in real life. But remember that the similarity and difference between language 1 and language 2 is going to affect your second language. Now understand the fact. For example, my first language was Hindi. Now whenever I'm learning new English words, I'm using the same pronunciation standards, the same pronunciation rules in English also. Suppose a word is written, there's a word called birthday. Now, if you try to write this word in Hindi and then try to read it, it will be birthday. But How do we pronounce it? We pronounce it as birthday. Birthday. So the difference in pronunciation, birthday and birthday, is because of the difference in English and Hindi. If I try to use the same rules of pronunciation on English, then I'm never going to speak English perfectly. Similarly, the sentence verb structure of English and Hindi is very different. In Hindi, we are going to say, मैं market जा रही हूँ. So verb comes at the end, जा रही हूँ. Whereas in English, the sentence would be, I am going to market. The verb comes in the middle of the sentence. So your brain is pre-wired with the linguistic rules of the first language. Now when you try to learn the second language, you are going to rely on the established rules and structures and then guess how the new language works. Because of which you make some common mistakes. So the greater the difference between two languages, the more negative effects would happen in the second language learning. अगर English and Hindi बहुत different है, तभी English सीखने में ज़्यादा दिक्कत आएगी. If you are learning a language like French, which is very similar to English, you're not going to face much of a problem. So there are a lot of difficulties you're going to face because you use first language rules when you are learning second language. One good example is under differentiation. You are unable to make distinction between two words in the other language. For example, borrow and lend in English feels like same. They are like synonyms to us. Why? Because we are not the native English speakers. So borrow and lend, they are different words. But as a person who is learning English as a second language, we are going to treat them as same. This is the problem that you will face when you are learning second language, and this problem is because you try to use the rules of first language onto the second language. This is known as language transfer. Now we move on to the next section in which I'm going to discuss language skills. What are language skills? In any language, there are 4 important skills that you must master in order to have command over the language. What are these 4 skills? We have listening, speaking, reading and writing. Listening, speaking, reading and writing. These are 4 skills that is going to impact how you have learned the language. Okay, so these are known as 4 skills of language learning. And these 4 capabilities allow an individual to comprehend and produce spoken language for proper and effective interpersonal communication. Now there's a format in which all these skills are learned. If you look at the context of first language acquisition, the child is going to first acquire the listening skill, then speaking, then reading, and then writing. Remember the time when you were speaking for the first time? You first developed listening skills. You were listening people. You were trying to understand what they are saying. Then you developed your speaking skills. Then you started reading books. And then finally you started writing. And this is the reason why we know language skills as LSRW. Listening, speaking, reading, writing. LSRW. This is the proper chain in which any language is learned. Okay, and this specifically applies to the first language learning. Because in second language learning, the teacher might first teach you reading and then will help you with listening. But when it comes to the first language, then in that case, you first listen, understand, then you start speaking, then you read, and finally you write. There are 2 other kinds of skills. One is known as active skill and one is known as passive skill. So if you categorize these 4 language skills, that is reading, writing, speaking and listening, in 2 parts, then 2 of them are going to fall under the active skills and 2 of them are going to fall under the passive skills. Now passive skills are also known as receptive skills. Receptive skills are listening and reading. Because learners do not need to produce language when they are indulging in these 2 skills. When you're reading and when you're listening, you're actually not indulging or you are not producing language. That is why it is known as passive skill or receptive skill. They are contrasted with the productive or active skill. Now, what are the productive or active skills? They are speaking and writing. Because in this, learners need to produce language. When they are speaking and when they are writing, they are actually producing language. That is why they are known as active skill. So the relationship between receptive and productive skills is a complex one. And we can see that both of them naturally support each other. So if you build reading skills, it is going to contribute to the development of writing. Whenever a child says that I want to develop my creative writing, the child is always advised that read more and more, because reading is going to contribute to development of writing. We now move on to the next section, in which I am going to talk about ear training. When it comes to listening, ear training is very important. What is ear training? Ear training is when a child or an adult is trained to listen to the sounds of the new language and understand what it means. So whenever you are listening to podcast or sounds or songs in English and you're trying to understand the accent, the pronunciation, that is called ear training. Now, ear training is very important because it is only through ear training that listening develops. There are various things which you can use in order to enhance your listening skills, and the most common ones are listening to radio channels, listening to podcasts, or listening to songs. So, there are a few ways in which ear training can happen. First of all, the person is asked to listen as much as he can. So he is asked to expose himself to the second language podcasts and audios and listen to them day in and day out. Plus, the speaker is asked to take a few words from what he has heard and then repeat it again and again. So you're kind of imitating the same word. So when you're listening to an English song, you're trying to learn 2-3 lines and then say it. This is ear training. Finally, we come on to the last topic of this audio lecture, which is multilingualism. What is multilingualism? Now let's first understand what is bilingualism. Bilingual means ability to use 2 languages frequently. If I can use 2 languages at the same time and I can speak them fluently, that's bilingual. So if I talk about myself, I'm bilingual because I am fluent in both English and Hindi. But then what is multilingualism? Multilingual means having the ability to use several languages with the same amount of fluency. Okay, this reminds me of a beautiful story from Akbar and Birbal books. There was a time when a messenger from some king's court came to Akbar's court and said that, I'm fluent in different languages and I'm so fluent that you cannot figure out which is my native language. Okay, and I would be extremely glad if you can figure out what's my native language. So Akbar was a wise ruler, so he asked Birbal that, it's your job to figure out what is this person's native language. So what Birbal did, Birbal went to this man's room at 2 a.m. in the night and put 1 glass of water on his face. This man got up suddenly from the bed and said something in Marathi. Okay, next day, Birbal came to the court and told Akbar that the native language of this man is Marathi. Now the man was amazed to find out this because last night when that water was spilled on his face, Birbal was hiding. So he was not able to see who actually put this water on his face. So next day when he came to the court, he said that, Akbar, you need to tell me what's my native language. And Akbar said that your native language is Marathi. Now the man was amazed and he asked that, how did you figure out? So Birbal came and said that you were so fluent in different languages that it was almost impossible for us to understand which is your native language. But A person